mean, I love azaleas too. You know, I was raised in the South, and I understand the passion for azaleas. But there's so many azaleas already planted. What I always think is, I'm going to enjoy everybody else's azaleas. Many, many thousands of dollars have been spent on azaleas right here in my work town of Jackson. I actually live in Henderson County, out in the middle of nowhere. Those of you who know me know I moved so I can take in as many homeless dogs as I can. But I can enjoy everybody else's azaleas. So I'm going to kind of collect the other things. Plus, azaleas can be a little picky. So without further ado, we will launch. Oh, one thing I do want to mention is I can do some follow-ups to this program. In other words, I'm going to mention some things as we go through, like how to make some of these shrubs and ornamental trees really pop with complementing with some other plants, or that they could also double as screen plantings. So as I mention those, make note of them, because I'm going to do a follow-up next week of your choice. That way can kind of help, you know, I want to hear from you what you want to hear more about. And that'll be kind of fun for both of us, because I always want to work with people and not be the lead charge. Go on. Move. It's not going to move for me. Huh.
Yeah, just click on the screen there, Carol, and then it'll probably.
Yeah. There we go. So azaleas are beautiful, but let me just talk about them for just 1 minute. They really do appreciate at least some afternoon shade, and I know it's a little bit cooler over there in your climate, but still, if you put an azalea out in hot all day sun, it'll live, assuming the other things are right, which of course are going to be well-drained soil and acid soil. But they are often more pest-prone in full sun. You're going to get this, you know, sort of look to your foliage, and it can even look sort of brownish. And your old growth might look like this right now as your new growth is beginning to start. And that's going to tell you you've got lace bug. Spider mites can also attack them. And usually they're not a problem so much if you are in a little bit cooler setting. And also, I sometimes think a lot of people like to plant them right around the house, and sometimes that pH can be a little iffy next to your foundation because the concrete can raise the pH. Plus, you have to go outside and look at the house to enjoy them. So I kind of encourage people to put them out there in those perimeter plantings, maybe, where they can catch a little bit of shade from some of your perimeter plantings as well. And you will probably enjoy them more and probably have less problem. All right, we're going to preach diversification, because we know, or we should know by now, it seems like it's a hard lesson, that if we plant a whole lot of one thing, then we create issues. The American elm, the American chestnut, of course, wasn't our fault. We didn't plant them, but a disease wiped them out. American elm, that was, you know, the most famous shade tree. They're not gone, but it did kill most of them. You know, we went crazy with, look what's happened with Bradford's. The knockout roses, right? And it wasn't that they infected all other roses, and it was the fact that we planted so many of them that spread that little mite that makes the virus. So we have to think about, we are a diverse group of shrubs, then we're going to be less likely to encourage some pest or disease to take over and do something bad. I always love this quote from Frank Zappa: "Deviation from the norm, progress is not possible." Of course, he was certainly a deviant from the norm. But a brilliant man. Actually never was a druggie, despite he might look like the type. He just was a real genius, and he really liked to experiment. And we all do. I think gardeners, we like to try out new stuff and would prefer to have a mix of plants. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some design suggestions before I get into the actual plants I'm going to suggest. I think a lot of times we go for the color, and that's you know, very human of us and understandable. But we should also think about shapes and texture when we choose plants. And if we do that, we're going to have year-round interest. I mean, this is beautiful. Right now, there's not a flower in the whole picture, but it's an interesting composition because of different shapes, colors of green, even red foliage. And of course, we want flowers because we want our pollinators and hummingbirds. I've finally got a hummingbird. 2 days ago, my first one showed up. All my friends have been bragging. I've been jealous. It's a little bit competitive, isn't it? So if you think of shapes, you know, and one of the options I'm going to propose to you for next week is how to design a screen. We have a brand new publication out there we've been working on, and it's about composing an interesting look, because it's sort of like a natural woods edge, right? Except that it's different evergreens, and part of the interest is that we have all these wonderful different shapes. So that's a lot more fun to look at year round than just a row of soldiers marching along. Once again, would invite trouble. So if anybody's interested in hearing about screens, and I can mix that with another one I call Bountiful Boundaries, and it's about including some of those plants in your screen, they're going to make that even better wildlife habitat. So those of us, we're gardeners, we're nurturing, we want to attract birds and pollinators. So that's always one of our goals. Just a few other compositions that are real interesting because of the shape. This Morgan arborvitae, and I'm a real fan of the yucca. I'm sorry, I know some of you are yucca haters. Because once upon a time, a yucca hurt you. Well, you know what? That is prejudice to then classify all yuccas as bad yuccas, because not all yuccas are going to hurt you. There are spiky, hurtful yuccas, and they're great. I plant them around my fence. After you turn in, I have a gate to turn in before you can turn in my driveway, because I don't want anybody running over my dogs. And out there, I use what I call mean plants. I got fierce yuccas. I got a hardy agaves. I got thorny things, because I don't want anybody thinking they're going to come through my fence or cut my fence, come around and try to take my Polaris that I finally bought me something to get around my property on. But look at the beautiful yucca. That will never make a trunk. Color guard yucca filamentosa, which stays right on the ground. How many plants are a predictable height? Very few. And remember, most plant tags lie. I can tell you a handful of plants you're going to get yay high and no taller. And the color guard, as you see, it just is a great little bow on a package. Fantastic. And the yellow pot helps a lot too, right there, doesn't it? Think about all the different shades of green as you compose, as well as textures and growth habits. This is a screen I did at my vet's house in Lexington, Tennessee. I consider Lexington really my hometown, because I live closer to it than I do to Jackson, in North Henderson County, just above the interstate up there. But he was looking at a neighbor's house back there, and now this is what he sees just beyond his little water garden. And the same thing can be done with winter pots. In fact, I want you to think about landscape like you do composing a pot, or like you do composing a flower arrangement, where you want something with some height, you want something with some fullness, you want some big blooms to contrast with the little blooms, and you're just going to do that on a larger scale. You're the artist in charge of composing those vignettes that appeal to you. And I was thinking about composing from your favorite view. For me, it's my kitchen sink is where I'm going to see the most plant material, and I always think about my kitchen sink first when I'm designing. I also have my hummingbirds feeders hang different spots around the house, because I run about 8 of them when it's full-blown hummingbird season, and one of them is actually designed for me to watch from my commode. Yep, right outside that window. All right, and we're also going to talk about maybe some of the little ground covers that you can use. We're talking mostly about woody plants in this talk, so the shrubs and the flowering trees that we're going to give you year-round interest. But remember to use ground covers as part of your design technique. For if you put a dark, burgundy colored euchera in the shade against brown mulch, it's going to disappear. But if you put this little ground cover, the little dwarf golden sweet flag, under it, or under your hellebores, then they're going to really pop under your blue hostas, So think about using, that's another talk I'm going to offer, is using ground covers in surprising ways, and how to make your designs more interesting, more beautiful, and some of the flowering ground covers. And which ground covers you should avoid that have turned out to be just too dadgum aggressive, or just have a lot of other issues. So we can do a whole thing on ground covers that is not just about ground covers as solutions, which I think just sounds boring to me, although it's true that they can be. I also think about layering. One of the things we love when we look out through a garden is the vista, is sometimes looking through and under limbed up things and seeing other things that have horizontal layers. Well, it's one reason I love dogwood best when it's planted where it gets a little bit of shade. It'll work out in full sun. We'll talk about how to succeed with dogwood here in a minute. But it likes really to be in that partial shade, especially from the hot afternoon sun. And when it does that, it has that layer cake look. Out in full sun, it tends to be more of a dome. Either way, it's a great plant. And then sometimes I like weird, crazy shapes. I'm a big fan of the Hollywood juniper, which was very popular decades ago, and then it kind of fell from grace. You couldn't find it much anymore. And now it's kind of making a comeback. I think other people are more interested in these sort of natural sculptures in the landscape instead of, we're getting away from the meatball syndrome where everybody carved their shrubs into meatballs and lozenges and mushrooms, and you couldn't even tell what they were. Hollywood juniper is a great, great plant. And I've got a few around my property just to watch that silhouette develop against the horizon. And sometimes people don't think about these yuccas and things that can be hardy and beautiful for winter interest, because to me, they're sculpture. They really are. This is in our parking lot right here at the experiment station. And there are many, many hardy forms of yucca and a few hardy agave even that we use. There's my color guard again. And I love color guard in a pot. I love color guard in the ground. And it takes a lot more shade than people might think and brighten up shade gardens. Only thing it really needs is good drainage. Look at the one right behind it, y'all, that one that looks like a little palm tree. That's a perfectly hardy yucca. This is Yucca rostrata, sometimes called blue-beaked yucca. I'm going to show it to you again a little bit later in the shade. And it has soft tips. These, again, are yuccas that aren't going to hurt you. You need to learn to find the friendly yuccas and use them for these architectural plants. There we go. There's the other picture of it. Here it's in a little bit of shade. This was a fabulous little composition. And in the background, you see that palm. Chinese windmill palm is hardy through most of Tennessee. Now, I know y'all are up on the plateau and y'all might be challenged to find that spot, but you'll often see certain selection of Chinese windmill palm that are hardy to 10 below. So look for those if you want to try that palm. I just helped my niece has she married well, and they built a swimming pool, and they're trying to landscape it for her son's wedding, which is going to be next year. So she wanted this tropical look, and we're in Zone 7 down there in North Mississippi, just outside of Mississippi State. And these were some of the plants that I located for her to landscape around that pool. So you can have that tropical look around your pool if you like with these plants. Oh, and one trick, by the way, instead of a handout, if you just want to take a picture of these screens, I do that sometimes now. I'll pay for some of these symposia, and I just keep my cell phone handy, and I'm trying to be better about putting the plant names on the screen so that people don't ask. That's often a frequent question throughout the talk, and then I can't remember which slide they were talking about. So pull that cell phone out and take a picture, and if I, then you'll have it identified. The kaleidoscope abelia has gotten very popular in the last few years for many reasons, but this is actually part of the reason to me is this winter interest. Because yeah, it changes color a little bit. It's a little more muted than those bright, gaudy kaleidoscope colors you're going to get in spring and summer. But it also keeps some color on there through the winter. If we don't have real hard winter, it can knock off some foliage. And I love the abelias anyway, because they're pretty tolerant in a wide range of conditions, and they bloom all summer for our pollinators. They're really tough little plants. And don't forget our conifers. We could do a whole program on conifers if you wanted to, conifers for the South. This is right here in our parking lot. Y'all are colder. Y'all can probably grow some that we can't. We have to be very attentive to which conifers will tolerate our heat and humidity. A lot of people don't realize that. What kills a lot of plants in Tennessee is not our cold winters. What kills a lot of plants in Tennessee is they don't like our heat and humidity. Even down in North Mississippi, my family has not learned this lesson. My sister-in-law bought 20 of a plant that she said, I said, Marianne, I wish you'd talk to me before you did that, because that plant's not going to live here. Well, the tag says it's hardy through zone 5. I said, Marianne, it's not our winter that's going to kill it. It's our summer. Her daughter, my niece, said she struggled and struggled to make those live so that I would be wrong. And I'm just petty enough to enjoy the fact that they're now all gone. So be aware of that. You got to know about the heat and humidity. And if you don't have a good source for figuring out which ones are, I'm sure some of you have the DUR. Every good master gardener group across the state has got to have a copy of the DUR. And if you don't have one personally, I understand they're expensive. Put it on your Christmas list. Make somebody else buy it. And this is the one you want, the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. Is that in reverse in the picture? Well, anyway, that's the one called the Dur. And it will tell you which plants don't like our heat. Because Mike Durr was a northerner who took a job in Athens, Georgia, where he established his career. And he would say, I've tried to, I've killed this 3 times. Now, how many books are going to tell you that? Most books make all the plants sound good. He will tell you, don't plant this unless you're willing to sacrifice the rest of your yard. He says things like, wisteria is a plant best enjoyed in other people's yard. He's very honest and opinionated, which makes it a great read, by the way. So these conifers, and see sprinkled in there with the deciduous holly, this is a beautiful landscape year round. The deciduous material and the flowering things that we sprinkle among there are just icing on the cake. But all right. And then one I think is another great plant that's making a comeback. About the time I decided I loved the weeping Yopon holly, it kind of disappeared in the trade. And now it's kind of, I'm finding it again. But look what you can do with that weeping Yopon. I mean, that is a beautiful plant, and that should be part of your screen as well. I love weeping plants. Taylor juniper looks like an Italian cypress almost in the landscape. This is in your Master Gardener handbook, by the way. Any of you who are Master Gardeners know this is the opening photo for the landscape design class, chapter that I wrote, which I hope, by the way, is very readable and understanding, but use something dramatic, use something vertical. All right, we're going to go into the actual, color through the seasons of the shrubs. I want to mention right off the bat, and it's an old plant that most of us have grown, is the Spirea thunbergii. It's called Thunberg spirea. It's a little lacy leaf thing. But the one the cultivar that I want you to look for is the one called Ogon, because Ogon is going to give you this fall color, this peachy orange fall color. And Thunberg can too, but Ogon seems to be particularly good about it. It's going to give you gold foliage all summer long. And I love playing with gold foliage. Here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at Faye Beck's garden, look how she used that as a backdrop for blue and purple, right? I love purple plants, but again, purple plants can kind of disappear in the distance. So, but if you backdrop them, and always think about that, complementing, contrasting plants, then you're suddenly going to get to see and appreciate that blue and that purple. By the way, working on a whole program about purple plants. I really have a thing about purple. And then, I'm in fall, by the way. I'm kind of going backwards through the season. We're going to go through fall and winter first. And this is something I meant to tell you. You will think about buying plants for the other seasons before you get into the impulse buy for spring color. So go to the garden center with a list, maybe with some of these plants that you intend to purchase. And then I know I'd succumb to some of the impulse buy too. But you'll be so glad later in the year if you buy some of these. Chinese pistache has this wonderful fall color, and it is such a tough plant. You have that harsh, dry site. Well, think about this. It's in the same family as sumac. Well, you see sumac flourishing, roadsides, heck, railroad beds, right? I mean, it likes hot, dry sites. So only it doesn't sucker and make a big colony. So the Chinese pistache, I'd say it's one flaw. It's kind of slow to develop. And it can be a little gawky in its youth, but then a lot of us were, so don't hold that against it. All right, so dogwoods we're going to talk about when I get to spring here in a little bit, but I want you to think about the fall color. It's a to me, dogwoods have, more seasons of interest, and I like to think about that when I select a plant. A lot of the old spring flowering shrubs we had, that was it, a week of glory and then it's gone, like some of our old fuzzy deutzias and things, although now we have better selections of those. So think about plants that are going to give you more than one season as you make your selections. Like this, the Virginia sweet spire, which will give you a late spring, early summer bloom that are so cool. They're slightly fragrant. They dangle like little caterpillars. And then the fall color, which just goes on and on and on. Now, one reason I love Virginia sweet spire is I really don't have to know the conditions. Usually when people ask me about something and I had to ascertain how much sun do you get there and is the drainage good? Well, this is a plant that you will only find in the wild because it grows right here in Tennessee in the swamps. You're going to find it in the water in the swamps. But like a lot of our swamp plants, we can take those out of those wet sites, plant them in a raised garden bed where they get good drainage, and they do better. Somebody said, why? I know that's true of common bald cypress. That was my mother's favorite shade tree. And she would buy 50 in a bundle cheaply from, the Forestry Service, and start some in the edges of the pond and ramble them up to whatever family member was building around the ponds, as we are prone to do on our farm. And in every case, the ones that were up higher and away from the pond grew faster. So apparently they appreciated good drainage. They only grow in the wet because they don't like competition, is the theory. So Virginia sweet spire, it'll grow in wet or dry. It will grow in sun or shade. Normally I find it, in shady, wet swamps in the wild. So that's a great, great plant. It's a little rangier than some people like. Some people like their plants to be real tidy. My friend Jason doesn't particularly care for it. I love it. Fothergilla is another, by the way, that one is native, as I mentioned. And here's another that is also native, though I've never run into it in the wild. In my wanderings, it is native to the eastern part of the United States. And it is a plant that will go in shade or in partial sun. I probably wouldn't put it out in the harshest sun. You see, it's got good fall color. This is at Cheekwood. Its bloom is early spring, and it's sort of like got that little dangly thing going on too, similar to the sweet spire. And the rest of the year is just sort of ordinary looking. So it really wasn't on my gotta have list until I saw, well, heck, thought it had a picture of blue shadow. Well, I thought there's a form, let me go back to it. Yeah, I stuck in new slides here and there, so it may show up later. This is, there's a form called blue shadow, and there's another form now called blue mist. And the foliage on those is this beautiful icy blue. And I've just got to have one, so I'm keeping my eyes peeled because apparently they're still kind of new in the trade. While I'm talking about fall color, I want to mention a perennial that kind of acts like a shrub. I hope some of y'all are growing this Arkansas Amsonia. It's the Amsonia hubrichtii. And it has this wispy foliage that is just gorgeous. It moves around and blows in the breeze. The spring bloom is a pale blue, and I just don't think it's very pretty. I mean, it's pretty, but you gotta like walk up to it and go, hey, there's a pretty little flower. The reason I grow it is for the foliage texture and the fall color. Especially look for the form called butterscotch. And you're gonna love this plant. Hot, dry site, good drainage, it's like that one that you need to put out where you never will take the water hose, right? I call those mailbox plants. So we had to find something to kind of replace. We're getting on into summer now. Knockout roses, which, have had such issues with the rose rosette. And of course, the research is going on right there at the Crossville station that the Wyndhams are conducting, trying to find some kind of remedy to keep roses from getting infected. And of course, breeders are working on trying to find roses that are resistant. But in the meantime, it's like, what am I going to place my knockouts with? So I'm going to have a few suggestions here that are going to give you long seasons of color. One is the Buddleias. Now, I know Buddleias get a lot of hit from the native folks because they say, well, the foliage doesn't provide anything for the insects. And then I remind them that actually most native plants don't either. And my favorite example is to think about anise tree. One of my favorite plants to recommend for screens is a wonderful big evergreen native, Alyssium parviflorum, and its foliage is actually toxic to insects, and that is why the foliage always looks so perfect. So does that make it a bad native? Even Doug Tallamy now has backed off and said that only 5% of our native genera are what he calls keystone, that are very important for pollinators to feed on the foliage. So I can send you that research if you would like. In the meanwhile, this plant's supplying nectar all season long blooming, right? So we've got our butterflies and our hummingbirds and our pollinators visiting this plant all season long. And it can be invasive and reseed in certain places where it's quite adaptable and only with certain cultivars. So it does get a hit a lot of times about being invasive, but remember the breeders respond to those requests and those problems and come up with sterile cultivars. So if you're worried about it, you can always cut the flowers off if you have one of the old reseeding varieties. But really, we've got to think about, I think at this point in time, providing for our pollinators with whatever will work the best in today's disturbed ecosystem. You know, to require it to have to be native, sometimes I think inhibits our ability to respond to the desperate need. I mean, we are having a decline in our insects, and we've got to have insects. So let's give them what they need. And I'll be glad to do a program on that. I call native facts and fallacies, where I correct some of the mythology that is spread around the native stuff and which plants I think are great for wildlife and should be used more often to respond to the urgent situation we do have going on. So one that's come out of these breeding programs is Miss Molly. That's Denny Werner's creation. Denny Werner's a fantastic plantsman over in NC State, retired now, but he's come up with a lot of awesome red buds and budlias and other things that you just need to pay attention to, because he's a great breeder who responds to today's request. There was one of the original Miss Molly's as it was being trialed down in UGA, and you can see it's a fantastic, nice big budlia, and it is carried by proven winners. So read up on it. Oh, and by the way, I always tell people, don't believe anything I say. I will send you all my references if you're interested in pursuing some of the things that you might question, and do your own research. I encourage everyone to do their own research. I always tell, don't believe anything one person says, ever. Find a consensus with several trusted sources. All right, so here are some of the hydrangeas you're going to find widely available in our garden centers. And you know, people ask me a lot of times, where can I find native plants? And I say, any garden center, because you can't walk into any garden center that doesn't have oak leaf hydrangeas, can you? Or smooth hydrangeas, the Annabelles, or dogwoods, or redbuds, or magnolias, sweet bays. You know, I could go on and on. Coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find them at any garden center if you know what to look for. And this is a beautiful, again, a beautiful composition at Faye Beck's, who's got these amazing things. And I could do a whole program for you on hydrangeas, most especially the late season blooming ones I'm going to show you in a minute, the paniculatas. I've been assessing Jason's enormous collection out here. He's got about 50 different cultivars for not just how pretty they look when they're in full bloom, but how pretty do they look later, because some of them look pretty blasted. They look terrible out there. The flowers all turn brown like somebody's taking a fire, taking a torch to them. Remember that, again, our oak leaves too are going to be that 2-season plant, right? Because you're going to get good fall color on those oak leaf hydrangeas. They really like half a day. All hydrangeas need good drainage. If you get that oak leaf in morning sun and afternoon, it's going to do best for you. Too much shade, it doesn't flower well, it gets leggy, and too much sun, it's going to look a little unhappy. Especially with the little honey, that golden form of oak leaf back there. Now, I'll tell you the truth, that's not a great bloomer, but we grow it for the gold foliage. And this particular combination, we've got this planted. I took this picture right here and can take it again here in about 2 weeks, of this blue columbine that has gold foliage, and it pops, doesn't it, against that little honey oak leaf hydrangea. Now that one will burn if it's out in full sun. So give it half a day, because too much shade, it turns back green. I think I misspelled leprechaun, didn't I? I should know better than that. Is it R-E? I'm Irish, I should know, or mostly Irish. Another one's going to bloom for you all season now that I'm suggesting perhaps as a replacement for those of us in West Tennessee. And I know that I have had friends have this succeed as a perennial lantana for them in both Knoxville and Nashville. And you will find it sold as ham and eggs. Ham and eggs, because there's your pink ham, right, and your yellow eggs. Miss Huff is one that's a little more famous. And Miss Huff is pretty, and I recommend both, but it's yellow and orange, which to me is a little bit harder sometimes to work with a plant palette. I think a lot of times we find a lot of flowers that are in the pink range and can make interesting compositions. And I think this one is a little bit more of a nice habit. So experiment, and as soon as people call me and they complain, they said, you said it was perennial, it hadn't come back yet. it wants the soil to get quite warm before it shows up. So plant it in that right site and also where it gets good drainage through the winter months. And then we'll do this for you. You can see that's a much younger photo of I, right? My hair is still red and I can still wear I can still rock a pair of Bermuda shorts back then, but you might try those and see how well you succeed with them. But let's not forget about foliage color for all summer interest. And this is an evergreen. This is our Alyssium parviflorum, the one I was talking about earlier. I usually recommend the solid green form as a great screen plant because this one's going to be slower growing. And it is called Florida Sunshine, which makes to me sound like it's not going to be hardy. We use this a lot here in West Tennessee and even in pots for winter color. And it's a great golden plant for sun or shade is where it works for us. And again, using gold foliage as understory to make those other plants show off, this ground cover popped on the scene. At first it was called all gold. And I brought one little pot home from North Carolina probably a decade ago, and this is what it looks like now. Now this is a Juniperus conferta. Sometimes the confertas tend to have some twig blight and stuff on them, but I've never seen it on all gold. Now it's being sold under the name Gold Pacifica or Pacifica Gold, I forget. And it makes a nice spreading little ground cover. It's never going to get any taller than, I don't know, maybe a foot at most. So understory your other plants where it has good drainage, you know, like most conifers require. Another one that's got a little gold spreading form. These are one of the smaller golden abelias. So you got the flower on there all summer, plus you've got the bright foliage. And this is twist of lime. We've got twist of lime, we've got twist of lemon. So experiment with some of those and enjoy the flowers as well. Rose Creek's one of the very best of the abelias for nice big buxom blooms. It has been in the trade now for several years. It was an introduction from University of Georgia. And I don't think you can not find this in a garden center. It's not native, but nor does it reseed or spread or do anything invasive. It's going to do this for you all summer, and your hummingbirds and butterflies will be thrilled, I promise you. And just a couple more, if you can tell I'm fond of them. The one in the background is Canyon Creek, which kind of has goldenish foliage as it starts out. And then it gets a little greener through the summer, but it has these wonderful big dangling blooms. There's oodles of them. Check out the glossy abelias. I have a little bit of a collection fetish. But if I could only have one, it's going to be the parent for all those. All these abelia cultivars we see showing up in the garden centers these days. This is one of the mama. This is a just straight Chinese abelia, Abelia chinensis. And I remember the first time I met it because I met it through my nose first. My mother was still alive. We were walking through the Atlanta Botanical Garden and we began to follow our nose and follow our nose. And finally we found this wonderful big shrub and it was just like fireworks arching out from this semi-evergreen plant. And the fragrance was just fantastic. Long bloom season. Love this plant. I cut a few branches off of it sometimes and bring it in the house. If you can find the straight form of Chinese abelia, grab it. You'll not be sorry. Doesn't reseed, not a problem. Now, we did have reseeding issues with our shrub altheas. Breeders went to work. We've got sterile forms now. You may call it Rose of Sharon, shrub althea. We know common names, you know, can vary from region to region. My mother called it althea, which I always thought would be a beautiful name for a cat. So they have bred them to be more floriferous. They have bred some to be more blue. Blue chiffon is one of my favorites, and I'm not mistaken, blue chiffon is one of the sterile forms. Diane, the whole goddess series, Minerva, Aphrodite, check all these out. And remember, these aren't grandmas anymore. They don't get as rangy. They are better behaved. We've collected a bunch of them here at the station. We even have some that grow very columnar, purple pillar. If you haven't seen purple pillar, it stays tight and columnar and covered with these beautiful purple flowers. And another thing you can do if you have one of the older ones, some of those doubles, which are not as useful, I will say, for the pollinators because doubles obstruct your butterflies trying to get in there to the goodies, to the pollen and the nectar. So I'm not usually a huge double fan, but I do want to encourage you to try this if you have a rangy old hibiscus. I'm not big about pruning plants. Usually I choose plants I don't have to prune and don't want to prune, but they bloom on new growth. And to tree form them like this and then just make a little moundy cut off top, it may take a couple of years to train it to do this, you will have this fabulous little flowering tree that you just kind of want to pop one in here and there as an accent. And while we're talking about design, one thing I want to encourage you to do is, we always were told, you know, you plant tall things at the back and then come towards you with lower things, and then in front of that, things that are lower still. But I think it's a lot more interesting if you pull one tall thing up to the front every now and then, because you get that play of light and shadow, which is so pleasing to the human eye. And I'm doing a whole program now on light, using light in the garden. Which plants do best backlit? Which ones act like stained glass? How do you create light and shadow so that you can actually see color better? And that's kind of a fun one. Over the years of photographing plants, I began to realize there's some real tricks to design using light as part of, and the plants that respond to that. But isn't that a cool thing to do? Do this. And one old nurseryman told me he had seen this in one of my presentations, and he had a bunch of old shrub althea that had been sitting in his operation for years, and nobody bought them. And he trained them all like this. He said, "Girl, they flew out the door." I love that. Made me happy. All right, we're getting into later summer, right? We know the shrub althea or the rose of Sharon blooms later in the summer. It loves the heat like all hibiscus. And it is a hibiscus, you know, it's Hibiscus syriacus. So hibiscus love heat and humidity and do quite well for us. And the paniculatas are a panisoled hydrangea, or late summer bloomers that come along after the other hydrangeas have finished. And they're more heat tolerant and more sun tolerant. Now, I would argue that a bit over here where Jason has them out in all day sun. Often they look a little unhappy by late summer and kind of blasted. I think they would probably benefit from a little bit of afternoon shade, but as he says, in West Tennessee, who wouldn't? And there's so many different growth habits now and styles that we can select from. So we had, you know, the old original, well, the old original was the PG, which meant Paniculata grandiflora, and it had these big dangling, and you can find ancient ones out there that are probably planted by 3 generations ago. But when they started the new breeding programs, Tardiva was the one that burst onto the scene, and that's the one on the right. Had more of an upright, lacy bloom, bloomed late, and those lacy ones, I will tell you, are more beneficial to the insects. You can find a lot more bees on those than you will on the one to the left, which is a lot more of they aren't really the flowers, they're the sepals that are showy. And those are not quite as useful, but as far as looks, they are cuter. So look for silver dollar, little lime, are some of those that are gonna have, oh, what's the other one that I like so much that's got that little pom-pom look? Anyway, I can do a whole program on the paniculatas if you want, that will show all the different forms now, the ones that'll stay small and shrubby. And these are easily pruned too at any time. And then the ones that can be pruned up to be tree form. That's little lime, as you can't tell, if you can't tell by the little, limelight's a great upright form. We got little lime, we got little lamb. Silver dollar is probably one of my favorites of these though. Bobo's the other one that's so cool. Now here's a native I wish were available more often. You know, sometimes some people want to say that I'm anti-native, and I'm certainly not. I love natives. I just happen to love other things as well that are good for our wildlife. But why can't we find Aurelia spinosa in the garden centers? My friend Plateau AgResearch used to carry it over in Memphis. It's got these enormous big heads, these clouds of flowers in late summer. It's on every roadside around here. People then find out it's that thing with all the thorns up and down the stems, and they turn against me. Why would you want that old thorny thing? That's the thing that pierced through my glove when I was falling down the creek bank and grabbed something to try to catch myself. And then you go to their house and they have roses, right? So remember, you know, sometimes roses have thorns and sometimes other great plants have thorns. And this offers so much more to wildlife. The tiger swallowtails love it. It makes little berries that are a blue-black that the birds eat. And the biggest leaf on the North American continent. Wonderful layers of lacy leaves. So you may have to dig up a little bit in the woods to move to your garden, and you may want to put it out in your mean garden. but I love the Aurelia spinosa, sometimes called devil's walking stick because it's got those thorns up and down the stems. And I'm sorry I didn't get the names of these on there, so hopefully I'm giving you time enough to write them down. When this native wisteria burst onto the scene, this is an American wisteria, Wisteria frutescens, and the name of it is Amethyst Falls. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And at first I thought, well, I'm going to see if it's, really pretty. You know what? It's a blooming machine, and it really impressed me. I looked at it 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden, I had to have it. So I probably got 4 of them now planted on my property. Some on some side or along some gates here and there to the property, and some on my own fence there around the yard where I can enjoy it. Its only fault, I guess, is compared to the Asian wisterias, it's not fragrant. I wish it were, but you can see the bees coming in there for it. They love it. So Amethyst Falls is an American, a native wisteria. We have other native wisterias, Wisteria Mackii, Clara something, I believe is one of the names. And there are also white forms of that particular cultivar, species. You can look for white forms of Wisteria Mackii. There they come, da 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 da. If you had one vine this year, I'm hoping it's this. And if you don't have a place for a vine, make one for this plant. This is our native honeysuckle, coral honeysuckle. And usually it's a spring bloomer. It blooms about the time the hummingbirds show up. Mine is just opening up at home. But get this particular cultivar if you really love your wildlife, because this is Major Wheeler. And Major Wheeler just doesn't know when to quit, y'all. Blooms huge in spring, then it continues to flush and bloom throughout the entire season. Maybe not as heavy as the spring bloom ever, but generously. And it may slow down a little bit here and there when it gets a little hot or thirsty, but give it a good drink of water. After every rain, you'll get a new flush. It keeps a few flowers on it all the way through fall. If you have a warm spell in winter, it tries to bloom out. There are other ever-blooming forms of, by the way, our native honeysuckle, but Major Wheeler is the one that's really easy to find in the trade these days. So get out there, love your hummingbirds, and get this out there for them that's going to take care of them all season. Now, early spring, the Magnolia stellatas. Now, these deciduous magnolias are completely well-behaved plants. They're not like the Bradford. So anytime people start talking to me about what can they do to replace Bradfords, these are going to come to my lips very quickly because they're very easy to grow. They're going to tolerate a wide range of sites, and they don't do anything bad. They're just beauties. So the stellatas are probably some of your very first to bloom. And remember, Latin ain't hard. The scientific name for this is Magnolia stellata. So what does stellata mean? Stars, right? So the star magnolia. And you can find many different forms. Some are going to be more shrubby, and some are going to be more upright tree forms. Some have a little flush of pink to them. But either way, you're going to get to enjoy them. Most years, yes, sometimes they get frosted. I quote Plato on that. Yes, some years you only get to enjoy them for a short while, and then you lose them to frost. But the same is true of a lot of our other shrubs. And this is a small tree that's probably going to outlive you and your children. So I like what he said there. And as we know that's true. We've driven past old homes and see venerable old forms of our deciduous magnolia. The magnolia, this is Solangiana. There's a whole bunch of old forms of Solangiana. And this is the typical color we see around here, although it varies different parts of the country. You'll see some that are a little bit more deep pink, and you'll see some now that are really, truly purple. Just stopped and photographed a beautiful one up against a red barn, which sounds horrible. But honestly, sometimes red and purple look beautiful together. I didn't get that downloaded off my phone yet, but I've got to have some of these rich purple forms. I've decided in my landscape, this is the year I was converted. If you want a tree form, there's a deciduous magnolia I really like, and it almost has that, Bradford shape, if you like that really trim, rounded or pyramidal form like the Cleveland pear might have. Then this is Wada's Memory. That's a terrible, ugly name, isn't it? Wada, W-A-D-A. Wada's Memory, deciduous magnolia. has won all kinds of awards for street performance as well. So tough, tough tree, and a beautiful, beautiful plant. There it is, a really mature specimens. As you see, that's glorious. Wada's memory, and it's a deciduous magnolia. It's a complex hybrid, so I can't tell you the species. All right, let's get back to a native choice if you want to go native. This is our American fringe tree. And it doesn't matter how many pictures you take of an American fringe tree, it's gonna look out of focus. I have laughed about how many times I've tried to get one that looks like in focus, but I've decided it's just the lacy nature of those little flowers. And the fact that they're always, moving a little bit in the breeze. Maybe I could find a perfectly still day. I don't know how to achieve one that looks like it's not just a little bit cloudy, because it's a cloud of flowers. So American fringe tree is native, although I've never seen it locally around here, and I wander in the wild a great deal. It is native to Tennessee. So it's dangles below the bloom. Sometimes it's called Grancy graybeard because the flowers are like little gray beards. But I'm also going to tell you I'm crazy about this one. And this is China Snow. I need to add a new picture of China Snow. It's going to be blooming here in just a couple of weeks because, as you can see there, I still got brown hair. And this one is probably doubled in size right out here. When I'm looking out the window, like there's one right out here, but there is one right out here in front of my office window a little bit to the right. And I like the snowiness of the flowers on the China Snow. This is a different species. This is Retusis, Chionanthus retusis. And that's the fact that they're held above the foliage, these little bright balls. So it has got great bark, by the way. Never had it reseed, not an issue. So China Snow fringe tree is a beautiful form. Why are viburnums not used more? Durr wrote a whole book on them. It's a great book. I think it's sitting right here on nothing but viburnums. And he said, a garden without viburnum is like life without song. And there are probably 200 different viburnum in the trade. You can get early spring bloomers. You can get late spring bloomers. You can get fragrance. You can get ones that are evergreen. You can get ones that are deciduous and have fall color. You can get ones that have blue berries and black and red berries and even yellow berries. My gosh, you could do your whole garden in viburnums, and there would be so much variation in shape and form and fragrance and food for birds. There are native viburnums that you may choose as well. I'm kind of prone to enjoy the evergreen forms. Well, that's not true. I probably have both everywhere, but the evergreen forms are quite useful if you want to use them. The smaller ones like Kanoi, maybe for will stay reasonably small for a foundation planting or as part of a screen composition as an understory. But this big one, this is Prague viburnum, and it is one of the ones probably in my top 5 for making an evergreen screen. It's going to be kind of a big pyramidal, a little bit irregular. It's relatively fast growing. It'll take sun or shade. Partial shade is probably not deep shade. Not many likes deep shade and stays full and nice. And you'll get more flowers with more sun. But you get spring bloom and a happy looking plant year round. Prague is a fantastic viburnum. Could be part of your bountiful perimeter, right? Because of the flowers and the evergreen foliage. And remember, plants don't have to be flowering or fruiting to be good for wildlife. Sometimes they just provide shelter. They anchor soil, make great nest sites. So they don't all have to be given food to be good for our wildlife. Our crabapples kind of got a bad name because people just started breeding like crazy for color and different shapes and forms and all these brilliant, brilliant colors. And some of them were prone to many of the diseases that, all apples around here. You have to look out for getting, rust and fire blight and all those things. So now I'm recommending people to, if you're into crab apples, be sure I sent Greg a list, and this research was done several years ago of the top 10 crab apples for Tennessee, because UT had participated in a national study on determining some good crab apples that did not have these problems. If you want that list, you're into crab apples, then Greg send that to you if he hasn't already. Donald Wyman is a white. There's a beautiful specimen in Cheekwood, and I need to put that picture in here. A prairie fire is a deeper pink than this. This one I believe is centurion, but grab those disease-resistant crab apples. A lot of them have good fall color. The crab apples themselves are good for us. Some of them are tasty and pretty for fall and winter interest, and the birds can also consume them. They also provide for a good bit of the Lepidoptera caterpillars. I know there's some idea that caterpillars won't eat non-native foliage, but that is simply not true. If it were true, we wouldn't have jobs for ornamental entomologists who are always trying to diagnose insects, pests on many of our ornamental plants that are not native. So I will send you, the Lepidoptera that actually does feed on the crab apple so that you are providing for everything up and down the realm. But look for those good ones. I love them. I'm starting to collect them. I'm going to do a big meandering collection of them up down my driveway because I don't expect them to get too tall to mess with my overhead electrical wires. Here's that oldie but goodie, these old Japanese carya. I know some people call these yellow rose of Texas, especially this double form. Looks like a little tiny double rose. Reminds you of a Lady Banksia rose, which wouldn't be hardy for y'all for sure. But the old carya, this picture I took up near Milan, this is thriving, y'all, under an old eastern red cedar. Now, how many things are going to thrive under an old eastern red cedar? It'll take sun or shade. It can be a little rangy, yeah. It's fabulous in flower arrangement because of that green stem and that arching habit. But also look for these, oh shoot, I thought I had Shannon in here, y'all. I think some of my new slides I didn't save. I'm so sorry. Well, let me tell you about it. Shannon doesn't have a double flower. It has these 5-petaled open yellow flowers. And I've told you I kind of prefer those open flowers because they're better for our pollinators. This one probably doesn't let the pollinators get in and get the goodies. So, and Shannon is so graceful and so beautiful. There's a gorgeous specimen right out here on our grounds that I'm converted. That's the one that I planted. All right, let's talk about dogwood, how to succeed with dogwood, because it's tough. And it's one of those plants that I say native plants aren't always the easiest to grow. Sometimes they can be difficult, and this is a good example. And the way to succeed with dogwood is it's one of those plants where you've really got to pay attention to where it would naturally succeed in our woodlands. So it likes a little cooler environment. An edge is perfect because you're going to get the right amount of sun, not too much sun, and the root zone is not going to heat up too much. So if you're determined to put it, though, if you want one out in full sun, and I'm not going to tell you not to because I would too. I just bought, finally, I broke down and got a pink and a white to put together, which is what I always wanted to do. They were a good price, and they're sitting in pots right now in my driveway waiting for me to plant them. Is you've got to take care of that root zone. If you've ever dug a little dogwood up in the wild, its roots run very shallow and wide, right under that leafy duff. Think about all the air exchange. It's got nice organic matter, but it's got a whole lot of air exchange. So be sure you plant high to make sure that your roots are getting the air they need. We need to remember a lot of plants have to have that. Maybe not our swamp plants, but they do need it, most of them, and I'd always rather plant high than too low. Then use a cooling mulch way out there, right? Way out there, so those roots can spread in that shallow layer where they really want to be, and they're not getting heated up by the hot sun. If you really want to sprinkle a little fairy dust in there to make sure, and plant in your native soil, don't dig a hole and put in a lot of soil amendments because you've created a bucket that's going to collect water in wet times and dry out fast in dry times because they do need adequate moisture. So be sure you supply adequate water that can run off and give it good drainage pretty quickly. Can't sit in water. Avoid the bucket. Go out to the woodlands where you know dogwoods right now are thriving and dig up a little bit of that leafy duff around those dogwoods, right? Because we know about the mycorrhiza and the helpful bacteria that exist in our natural soil that help plant roots pick up water and nutrition. And if you want to kind of sprinkle that little duff into your shallow planting hole, your wide, shallow planting hole, then you are certainly supplying that magical mycorrhiza, and that should help as well. And then don't let anything near it that might ding the bark. That's the other thing. Dingbark invites dogwood borer and problems and pests. So keep that, if something creeps across your mulch and gets near that trunk, don't you dare get near it with that weed eater. You get down on your knees and weed it with your hand. And you can have a dogwood like we're seeing right now, some of these old graveyards. I'm going to go photograph them when I leave here. I know exactly where I'm going to go today to photograph some ancient old dogwoods that have stood the test of time. There's the pink one. I've always wanted the pink. There's a lot of good pink. Be sure you get those UT disease-resistant forms. You know, UT leads the nation on dogwood breeding and resistant forms, and they're widely spread now across Tennessee in the better garden centers. So sometimes you got to look for them. And there they are together, the combination I've always envied right down here in Hollywood Cemetery. All right, some other dogwoods though that are easier to grow than our native, and I'm going to recommend these for several reasons. These are late winter bloomers, right? I want something when it's just quite spring. Maybe the daffodils are starting to show up a little. So we've got two I'm going to talk about. Cornus, which is the genus for dogwood, our native dogwood, Cornus florida. This is Cornus moss. It's sometimes called cornelian cherry because it makes an edible fruit. Now, most of them aren't quite this showy in flower, but Golden Glory is. So if you're growing it for the showy flower, look for the Golden Glory. If you're growing it for the edible fruit, some of you probably already know and order plants from Cool Springs nursery over there. They're in Cookeville. And Cool Springs, Hidden Springs, Hector Black, who we finally lost him last year or a year before. As well, I think he may have been 90, y'all. But he's always collected easy to grow edible fruit. And now his daughter and her partner run that. So you can still get, if you want the edible fruit, the ones that are selected, all of them are going to have edible fruit, but those were selected for bigger and sweeter fruits. So that would be my source to go with them, Hidden Springs. There's another species now. This is Cornus officinalis. And it's not quite as showy to me. We have both of them out here on our grounds, and you call it Japanese cornel or Japanese cornelian cherry. The cherry, of course, it's not, but it does have edible fruit. Both of these are going to give you interesting bark over time. They're easier to grow than our native dogwood, not nearly as picky. The Japanese one tends to have good fall color. And there is your red berry, your edible fruit. So you're going to have that for you, which is actually sold in European markets as an edible fruit, or for your critters, right? I'm always looking for those edible landscape plants that I can graze on, and so can the birds. I'm going to go into red buds here. Our old typical red bud just finished its peak here. Y'all may still be peaking, and we are just starting to get into the heavy dogwood peak. And this is an ancient old red bud, Cercis canadensis, on our grounds that has your typical pinky purple bloom. They're of course not red. And then we have Appalachian red, which has got a deeper hot red color in our collection. And just to show you the difference in the color, there's our roadside red bud there on the left. Appalachian red is on the bottom. And on the top right is a pale pink form called Pauline lily. Plus we have white forms, and we have, this is Oklahoma white. The Oklahoma red buds have a prettier leaf to me. As you go further west, they begin to develop a little bit different, adaptation to the hotter, drier western conditions. And they have a shiny, undulated leaf that just kind of glitters in the sun. So I really like the Oklahoma red buds. And this form will give you that white. So you can put those together or put it against, as I photographed it against this Japanese maple, so that white really pops. But a lot of them now have great foliage, right? Because red bud bloom season is so brief. By the way, they're edible. I hope you've tried to eat some of the red bud flowers. They're delicious. Crunchy, sweet, a little bit of tangy aftertaste. But look for some of these that are going to give you foliage excitement all season. The variegated forms, floating clouds, these are going to really be appreciative of a little bit of afternoon shade, or the leaves can get a little bit scorched looking in the hot parts of summer. So floating clouds, this is at Mike Durr's yard. I was lucky enough to get to stay at Michael Durr's a few years ago, and got up one morning and photographed his yard before folks got up. Then Hearts of Gold got this great golden foliage. It's been around for a while, and it is still my favorite of the golden forms. They have some now that have, reddish new color, but I think the Hearts of Gold has the best growth habit and the prettiest long-lasting gold color. So look for that one. Then we have, of course, purple leaf forms out there, and now we even have weeping purple leaf forms out there. And this is one of Denny Werner's creations. I mentioned Denny Werner earlier. So I love weeping plants because they're so interesting even when they're not in bloom. And in the winter, right, they're like frozen waterfalls. So this is a favorite plant of mine for year-round interest with the dark foliage, the weeping habit. Its blooms are not as showy maybe as some of the upright forms, but so what? You got all this other. Now there is Denny Werner on the left. I spoke for the International Plant Propagators Society meeting. It was 2018, and he led us on a tour of some of his newest over at the Neubauer Nursery down in Middle Tennessee. And Flamethrower is the most recent creation there at the top right. And you see there you get the best of both worlds on Flamethrower. You get the maroon new foliage, and then you get the gold foliage. It begins to turn gold as those leaves age. So I got one. We had them at our plant sale last year, and mine is at home again, waiting to go in the ground. I've got to figure out where to best show that thing off. Denny's awesome breeder. Now we have gold weeping forms, by the way, too. Golden Falls is another one. All right, so now I've already showed you that, but that's another photograph of the little honey with that blue combine. There are some lilacs that do well for us in the South, but you have to pick the right ones. We can't do well with a lot of the northern lilacs. We have had good luck with Declaration, Bloomerang, and Betsy Ross is a white form. And it's gotten to be a relatively tree-sized out here in our parking lot area, just as in peak bloom right now or any minute now. Oh, there's Shannon. Y'all, I stuck it in toward the end. I'm sorry they got out of order. Shannon is that single flowered form of the Japanese Caria that I think is so much more graceful than the old double form and better for our pollinators. And this is my last slide because I'm going to encourage you. What we talked about was providing color throughout the seasons, different plants that will help you do that. But sometimes you just want to cheat, right? This was a little idea I stole. I took this picture in Knoxville a few years ago. And those are really, they're just little styrofoam balls you can buy at any hobby store. You stick them on a stake and you stuff toothpicks in them, or those things you use shish kebabs if you want to make big ones, and spray paint them the colors. And look what they did. They repeated the colors of the plants back there. And that's a fun trick. If you feel like your garden's just a little bit boring sometime of year, then make some of these, spray paint them your colors that are going to go with the rest of your plants and pop them in